In addition to Micron, more actions must be taken to expand investments in training for green infrastructure jobs, particularly for skilled trades. The transition to electrify everything from gas stations to gas stoves will require highly skilled labor to upgrade safely. As reported by the Wall Street Journal, right now, there is a talent shortage to complete current energy upgrades. New York must be proactive in building a bigger energy trades workforce to achieve climate goals. And please remember this, college is not for everyone. High school graduates or people seeking a career change can earn a good living with a good career in the energy trades. The New York Independent System Operator is clear. New York needs to double or triple its electricity supply. Otherwise, there is not enough electricity to electrify everything over the next several years. And all of the above energy strategy must stay on the table to electrify 2 million homes across the Empire State while maintaining reliability. These forms include nuclear, hydrogen, renewable natural gas, retrofitting plants, and installing utility thermal networks fast. Don't forget that New York led the energy transition with Plumbers Local 1 when gas lights were phased out for electric lights. We did that before. 100 years ago, we could do that again. History and pure math on electric supply levels affirm in all of the above strategy is needed to facilitate a smooth transition to newer, cleaner energy sources for a cleaner energy future in New York State. Thank you, Rue.
Greg, thank you very much. Next up is Isuru from Nuclear, New York. Isuru, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. I will present a few slides when I'm able to. But I'll get started. So yeah, my name is Isuru Sen. Speaking on behalf of Nuclear New York, which is a...
Isuru, can you hold 1 second because Greg might have to leave, and let me just ask him a few questions before we give you the floor. Greg, your members are also taxpayers and retake payers. What is your view on electrification and clear energy generally from your perspective, sir?
A lot of our members absolutely live in New York State, and they are gravely concerned about the future rates per kilowatt hour for the cost of purchasing electricity and also the transmission costs. But the thing at the heart of their concerns is actually the uncertainty and the concern about the loss of jobs. There's a lot of jobs at risk here if we don't make a just and smooth transition to an all of the above approach.
Now, as I understand it, the pipe trades are heavily involved in the energy industry. What is the extent of job loss that you and other trade will face in New York begins to phase out fossil fuel power plants?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Rue. Roughly 2,000 New York State pipe trades workers will be initially impacted in a negative manner, and the other trades, it takes the number up to about 8,000 trade workers that work and support the energy industry, whether it be retrofitting, modernization, and maintenance on the facilities that already exist. It will also close the door on the future siting and building of some of the traditional power plants.
Well, now we're going to go back to Isuru. Isuru, take back the floor, please. And I'm sorry for the interruption.
Oh, I know. Greg's rushing off to do some important stuff.
But thank you, everyone.
My name is Jared Waits. I'm a partner with the law firm of O'Donoghue and O'Donoghue in Washington, D.C. We are general counsel to the United Association, which is the International Union for the Plumbers and Pipe Fitter, Greg's group. And I've also had the privilege of working with Greg and John Murphy and the pipe trades and their contractors in New York, which like 24,000 members, workers, and almost 1,000 contractors. They are also probably the leading trade on most energy projects. Their skills are just in high demand for energy projects. And frankly, they're very good at it. It's a high skilled business, and they work hard and invest a lot in training to be on top of these issues. Our main position in this whole debate is rather simple. We don't think anyone disputes the need to move to clean energy, to decarbonize and move the entire economy to clean energy. That said, there's a lot of debate and discussion for good reason on how to do that, how to most effectively do it and safely do it and sensibly do it. In fact, this and a lot of people share that view, and the current plan needs a good bit of work. In fact, this webinar is being sponsored by the Clean Energy Jobs Coalition, which consists of labor, business, and community groups gathering around to put another voice out there in this debate. The key thing to recognize here is that while everybody agrees that we need to convert to clean energy, you can't forget that that energy supply has to be reliable as well and affordable. And that's where the issues arise, because reliability means that you need to have an adequate supply. It means the sources that you're using need to be reliable and need to be there and work when you need them, and that you have to have you need sufficient generation capacity as well as sufficient transmission capacity. So you're talking about a major build out, a huge build out of the energy grid. And if this is not done right, the consequences are very serious, because you run into astronomical utility rates and power outages. In fact, California right now, which has a similar plan to New York, has been forced to go back to extending nuclear plants and fossil plants because or face power shortages because their supply planning is not sufficient. So that's what we're looking at, and that's one of our big concerns. And right now, we have a major issue and concern that the current plan is embodied by the final scoping, the current strategy is embodied by the final scoping plan released by the Climate Action Council several months ago, is leading toward a major supply deficit. And the facts and data on that are very strong. It could really lead to trouble. And the reason it's leading to a deficit, a critical, dangerous deficit, is because on the supply side, it is focusing almost exclusively on wind and solar, with battery storage. It also relies on hydroelectric, but hydroelectric's largely tapped out in New York. You can't get any more. And they've been buying some from Canada, but that exports a lot of production jobs. So going forward, it's really wind and solar. And I want to make clear, nobody in our group, is against wind and solar. Everybody, it's common sense note shows you need that. They have to be a big part of the plan. The problem is wind and solar alone are not enough. And this is borne out by NISO, who is the New York's grid operator, and of course, one of the state's leading energy experts, who is predicting that demand is going to triple. It's going to grow by 300% in the next less than 20 years. It's going to triple. So what we're looking at is you need to replace hundreds of fossil plants right now to just replace what's out there. And then you need to triple that. So we're talking about a huge undertaking. And wind and solar, and what NISO shows is that even under the absolute most optimistic projections and scenarios, wind and solar with battery are never going to be enough. So it estimates and comes in and says, we'll get into the details later, but it comes in and says, look, New York is going to absolutely have to have a huge amount of alternative clean power, which they call zero emission dispatchable power. We often refer to it, just as you think of it, a good way to understand it is renewable is the leading green sources of wind and solar. Clean power is other zero carbon alternatives, and these include advanced nuclear, bioenergy, combustible hydrogen, thermal, and the plan is embracing thermal, but the other clean sources are excluded, and they're excluded under the language of the CLCPA, the main climate law. They're excluded, and what that means is they can't get subsidies. And in the energy world, in the new energy world, subsidies are king, because this is all new technology, and bioenergy and hydrogen need subsidies as much as wind and solar to get them off the ground and to accelerate them. And that's not happening right now because they're excluded under the CLCPA. And there's other issues such as electrifying major sectors too fast and too soon, and phasing out fossils too soon before you have adequate, reliable, clean power to replace what's there and to meet the increased demand from electrification. And there's a lot of work to be done, because we just heard it last night, Albany in the budget bill passed the bill to electrify buildings, all buildings throughout New York. And that's going to put amazing demands on the grid, on power production side. And we cannot afford not to develop these other clean sources. And you need to build out and develop renewables to the maximum extent possible, but also these clean alternatives that are much more reliable and are needed to shore up the inherent unreliability problems with wind and solar, because sun doesn't shine every day and wind doesn't blow every day. So that's kind of our main focus right now, is educating and trying to broaden the strategic approach, which, by the way, the federal government uses and other states use, that says all the above strategy. Everything we can use to decarbonize, we need to pursue. And that's not happening right now.
Thank you, Gary Waits, who is a partner with Washington, D.C. law firm and energy policy leader. Now we're going to go back to Isuru Senevi, an investor and member of Nuclear New York. Take it over, sir.
Hi, thank you so much. So I'm speaking on behalf of Nuclear New York. We are energy policy researchers and advocates we are independent advocates for reliable carbon-free energy. So we bat for, as you can see here, climate and community, nature and jobs. So just to step back a little here, these are emissions, global greenhouse gas emissions by sector. I know it's a little busy slide, but energy, you can see, is about 3/4 of emissions, but agriculture is a big piece, and there's other industries too. And within the energy, about 1/4 of the emissions come from industry, about 1/6 come from transportation. This is road as well as aviation, shipping. And then another 1/6 comes from buildings. And so we talked about switching some of these sectors over to electrification. So currently, only about 1/4 of the emissions are from the electricity sector. So we want to move more fossil combustion means of energy production into electrification. But that means the demand for reliable and affordable electricity will expand materially, as previous speakers have mentioned. And this is also kind of following up on what the discussion we had about the dispatchable emissions-free resources. So this is New York Independent System Operators resource system and resource outlook from September last year, said that DFERs that provide sustained on-demand power and system reliability will be essential to meeting policy objectives while maintaining a reliable electric grid. DFERs will require committed public and private investment in research and development efforts. And this is all on top of energy storage, which is needed in mass quantities, but the DFERs are on top of that. So effectively, the takeaway is that the person who has to keep the lights on, responsible for keeping the lights on, says we need firm and clean energy. How much of that is shown in this chart? So in the 2040 scenario 1 by NISO, they say 45 gigawatts of deferreds are needed if New York were to pursue this solar and wind primarily as the means for decarbonization. You just need this much carbon-free dispatchable sources, which is larger than the existing entire infrastructure generation capacity in the state. In the other scenario, scenario 2, it's 27 gigawatts, which is higher than the current fossil generation capacity across the entire state, just to give a sense of the scale. And as previously mentioned, we are not moving nearly fast enough to make this happen. So where are these firm clean generation technologies, and how do they compare on other metrics? So this is a study that the DOE just put out the series of studies called Liftoff, and this is the advanced nuclear piece of it. And what this shows is which generation technologies are clean and which generation technologies, so the clean is nuclear and the renewables, and then which are firm, which is mostly the existing fossil infrastructure. And then nuclear is firm, and you can make renewables firm with storage. But there are other dimensions to this story, which is land use. We see a few of these technologies have low land use, but some of them don't. And then the amount of transmission needed to get the energy generated to where it's needed. And you can see the fossil generation technologies have very minimal transmission needs, as does nuclear. Whereas if you're trying to do it with solar and wind only, you need a lot more transmission built, which is fine, but that just means it's another cost onto the ratepayers' bottom line. And then the other side of this, which kind of gets glossed over, is the local economic benefits. When you have a factory-like setting where you generate a lot of anything, cars or electricity, you have an ability to unionize, and you have an ability to negotiate better conditions. But also those jobs are stable and they stay in the community, generate tax revenues, you're a good neighbor. So that also, you see the fossil generation sources and nuclear hydro provide those benefits. So, and then we come back to the cost, which is a critical piece of this story. So as of now, we know that solar and wind are cheap on the plant level basis, and nuclear may not be as much. But we think with sustained development that we are seeing across the world and the country, nuclear will come down, much like solar and wind have come down over the last 2 decades. So digging a little deeper into the jobs, unionization, and benefits, this chart is also from that Liftoff study, which I highly recommend everybody go read. So these are different generation technologies and the jobs generation per gigawatt of output. You can see a nuclear, existing nuclear plants have generate about 500 jobs per gigawatt, when advanced nuclear, which is in the dark green here, generate about half of that. But that's still multiples higher than these other generation technologies. And also, the wage component is super critical. The people who keep our lights on and keep our houses warm deserve a high quality of life, and we want those people to transition not to kind of low skill work, but advanced work, technical work, STEM work, pipe fitters, welders, carpenters. All these people work at nuclear plants, and they can upskill, and it's kind of similar skills that they have at fossil plants. We can get them to do more interesting and more advanced work with nuclear and pay them better. Similar with unionization, you see the distribution of which technologies do better for the workers. And we talked about the local community benefits previously. So what's happening around the world? Japan is not only recovering, repowering their existing facilities, but also building new nuclear plants. Canada is not only spending massive amounts on their existing nuclear fleet, the older technologies, but also brand new technologies, the small modular reactors. The UK has a huge backing to get a big chunk of their grid from nuclear. And these are all, if you can notice, these are all in the last year. These are headlines from the last year or two. And also in the US. So Wyoming is building a advanced nuclear technology. This is Dow Chemical is building a industrial facility that's powered by a nuclear plant in the Gulf Coast. And Michigan is going to study whether adding nuclear has benefits to the previously solar and wind only plan. And so this is this is just a small subset of all the kind of exciting developments that are happening in the nuclear space around the country and around the world. So we actually are lucky that NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, actually did some of this analysis on what happens. What they found is that this is in a decarbonized scenario, adding even small amounts of nuclear obviates large amounts of intermittent generation and storage needs, and these defer needs, which we talked about before. So what that means is you save resources and land, but also even assuming kind of conservative cost estimates from NYSERDA, you still save money by adding nuclear to the story. So I'm going to stop there, but this is exciting opportunity, exciting time. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act allocating something like $40 billion in the federal government is dedicating towards existing and new nuclear over the next decade. So New York should be at the front lines and benefit from these jobs and these clean energy technologies, but we need to act now.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Gary. And thank you, Isuri, for your presentation and opening statements. Now we're going to go to a Q&A, and I'm going to start with you, Isuri. We have a few questions. What do you think, or to what extent do you think nuclear energy can help New York meet its clean energy needs? That is, what percent roughly do you think it's visible here?
Sure, yeah. So currently nuclear is about 20% of our electricity generation and about 43% of our carbon-free energy generation. Hydro is the big chunk, and we are growing solar and wind. So we actually put out a policy brief last summer, along with the Clean Energy Jobs Coalition called Bright Future, which calls for nuclear to be 50% of New York's electric grid, so that we have that reliable backbone, and you can have, but that still requires a vast expansion of solar and wind. So you still, you have a mix of all generation technologies so that you can have a reliable, dependable grid that builds prosperity.
Follow the news, and we all hear reports about the newest generation of nuclear energy. Example, advanced nuclear systems and modular nuclear reactors. What can you tell us about those, sir?
Sure, yeah. We are excited about the advanced technologies that are coming it's like thinking about nuclear plants that were built in the 70s, 80s to today, that you can build today and that you are building today. It's like airplane that was built in the 70s, 80s. It flew and safely, but you've done so many improvements with modern electronics, modern material sciences. So you have all these improvements that you can bring to the table today. But there are, some of these advanced nuclear have additional inherent safety features and low waste yields. Some of them recycle nuclear waste from previous generations. It reduces consumption of water, and some have come with embedded storage, which I think is very exciting. For instance, the project that I mentioned in Wyoming, that one has the ability to ramp up output by 50% on a kind of hourly basis. So if you are in a kind of renewables heavy grid, this can backstop with not only generation, carbon-free generation, but also ramp up and down as need be. And I guess the other exciting thing is the modular construction, both for large modular reactors and small modular reactors. We can make them go from building like large infrastructure projects to more like building manufacturing plants that build kind of more like airplanes or cars.
Gary Waits, we have a few questions for you as well, sir. You laid out some potential serious problems in the state's master energy plan, but you also indicated that there might be solutions and ways to correct those problems. Could you give us a few examples on that, sir?
I'll be glad to. I want to state first, though, our group is aware and believes, the policymakers in New York and a lot of the stakeholders have done a tremendous job and have done a lot of great things, including thermal energy networks that are being promoted and other things to move this goal forward. And we want to recognize that because we're really about, solutions. But there are issues that have to be addressed because our members face the bad consequences that happen if you don't have enough reliable power, just like all New Yorkers do. And those consequences are serious. Power outages, you're talking about nightmares. It happened before Broadway closed down and business closed down. People get sick and can't, get their dialysis and all sorts of problems. And same thing with, electricity rates are already high. They could go through the roof if you don't have this controlled and have a reliable plan in place. And when those kinds of things hit, who do they hit the worst? The poor and working families. So we're very concerned with this. And I think to follow up on what Isu said, and what I mentioned earlier, we believe the solution, which we're taking the slogan from the federal government, that they use the slogan or the strategy they call all of the above approach. That means developing all the renewables that you can, including wind and solar, but these other options. Isu mentioned nuclear, and there's a whole new generation of nuclear technology. It's safer, it's less costly, and it's catching fire with the federal government. Other states are using it. The other ones I've mentioned include bioenergy, which is not recognized under the New York law right now. And bioenergy can have a zero carbon impact because might have some carbon release, but it removes methane from the atmosphere, and that has a net carbon, zero carbon benefit. That's another key one. And interesting enough, that we did the research for this when we were doing comments on the scoping plan. We found 39 states out of the 40 states that have serious energy laws, 39 states recognize bioenergy. New York is the only one that doesn't. That tells you something. The hydrogen is attracting like $1 trillion worth of investment worldwide. And New York only recognizes hydrogen fuel cells, not combustible hydrogen you can use to run power plants. The city of Los Angeles just signed a mega deal to bring combustible hydrogen in, to have it piped in for electricity in Los Angeles. This can and is being done, and the federal government is supporting all of these. The recent legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, and then the Infrastructure Act before that, we're talking probably close to $500 billion of federal money coming out to support all these options that New York will be cut off from. Because developers are going to go to other states where they can get state subsidies and the federal subsidies, and New York law doesn't recognize these to provide New York funding for them. And now we're talking about a cap and invest bill, which is on the table. And that's a good idea. Most states are going to end up having to have cap and invest, cap and trade. And New York's going to be raising billions of dollars to invest as well. But if you don't have a reliable plan with enough energy, you're in big trouble. So let's look at the numbers. I mentioned before that NYSO came out with reports on this. And specifically, they estimate, as I said, the demand for electricity is going to grow by 300%. And so they say, even if you develop all the wind and solar you can, including the major strides that have been made recently, you're going to still need 45 gigawatts of what they refer to as dispatchable zero emission power. And that means sources that the power's there all the time, 24/7 when you need it. And that can be nuclear, it can be bioenergy, it can be these other things that we mentioned. It does not work that way with wind and solar. And that's why you need these other sources to balance the inherent limitations, inherent reliability limitations of wind and solar. 45 gigawatts, that's 45,000 megawatts of new plants that are needed. That is a mammoth demand. And it spells it out in NISO reports, and the Climate Action Council actually recognizes this and acknowledges it in their final scoping plan. The problem is they take zero action, zero concrete steps to make this happen. And we're 17 years away, less than 17 years away. And let me just say something about construction. This is what we do, right? We know this world. To build a major plant takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time. You have to go through design, siting, financing, permitting, the actual construction startup. Now we're looking at what that 45,000 megawatts translates to is the need for some 9,500 megawatt plants. These are huge plants. 90 of them you'll need across the state. And we haven't even started yet because they're not recognized under the CLCPA. These alternatives are not recognized. That's 90 plants that have to be developed, designed, financed. You have to do siting, you have to do permitting. The construction itself can take 3, 4, 5 years. And so we're behind the 8 ball on this issue, and it's critical that it gets started. Like yesterday, really, it really needs to move now. And the last thing I'll say on this, I know we don't have a lot of time left, but it's very interesting because we looked at this in a holistic way in terms of, first we looked at it on the jobs issue, and New York, New York is a good place for labor. It treats workers well. There's good provisions already in the CLCPA and good provisions in New York law to help make sure the jobs that are created are good jobs. And we looked at that, and we looked at the labor issues, but we also looked at the entire picture, as I explained here, in terms of the overall reliability of the plan, the overall soundness of the plan. And that's where we found these issues. And NISO did the research, the incredible research, and they document it, and they are the true experts. And there's no denying this. There's no denying this. It just has to happen. But it's interesting. One of the follow-up things we did as a matter of research is we compared wind and solar projects to these alternative clean projects. And nothing against wind and solar per se, but they are the type of plants, they take fewer people to build and they employ fewer people to operate. And in fact, when we compared them, we developed a chart that we submitted with our comments on the scoping plan, we showed that these alternative clean sources often create up to 1,000% more jobs than wind and solar. 1,000%. So there's a bit of, I guess, poetic justice here in the sense that the plan that's needed to protect New Yorkers, keep them safe, keep a reliable supply, adequate reliable supply that is needed anyway, that has to be done without question, also happens to be the best plan for workers. And, the CLCPA has a strong theme running through it, rightfully so, for what they call just transition. And that means they know that as you phase out hundreds of fossil plants, that a lot of working people are going to lose good jobs throughout the states by the thousands, as Greg was explaining, by the thousands. And, unless the right steps are taken, we're not going to create thousands and thousands of good new jobs. But when you embrace clean energy alternatives, you will. So it's a real win-win situation, and something that should be considered also. It's a bonus on something you need to do already. And we think that there's a lot to be gained there, because when you put all that together and you put it together with good labor provisions and policies in the law, then first of all, you're leveraging the investments to create the right kind of energy you need, and then you're leveraging to make sure, you know, the jobs are created in New York and stay in New York, and that's what everybody wants. And the last thing on this, another big theme through the CLCPA, is the need for environmental justice to help communities that have been hurt over the years by, you know, pollution, and they're trying to steer these investments into those areas. It's a great idea. It's something that should be done. The federal government's doing it big time, and it's the right thing to do. But the clean sources can create a lot of more jobs than wind and solar for those. And that wind and solar will create some, and they will, and they should. But these clean sources can create a lot more, and it's needed anyway. And then there's a particular set of labor policies, namely project labor agreements and what we call pre-apprenticeship programs. The combination of which, when you put those policies and you tack them on to these investments, it's really the single most effective strategy for helping disadvantaged communities, because the pre-apprenticeship programs act as a funnel, and they reach out to neighborhoods and they help bring those kids in and gear them up and get them into real apprenticeship programs, and becomes a pool to source labor into the building trades to meet these huge demands, these new huge growing demands, and they're good jobs. So all in all, when you put these different components together, you have a heck of a plan. And look, New York is already a major leader in clean energy, and it should be proud of that, because they're further than, you know, California and New York are at the top of the game, and they're both really pushing it and doing great things. Now New York has a chance to really distinguish itself and really show the rest of the country how this should be done. And that's what we'd like to see.
Gary, I have one more question for you before we get to our audience. You also mentioned thermal energy networks as something that could serve as an alternative.
Sure.
Do you mind elaborating on that, please?
Sure. I will. Thermal energy networks is a new development. The most progress of which is in New York. In fact, following comments of fellow government, we're telling them about New York and how they're promoting thermal energy networks. It's one of the real strong points in the current energy plan that they're doing. It's new, and it's at ground level. So there was an amazing coalition of labor and business and environmental groups last year that passed the thermal energy law. And what that did, it was the first step, and it gave the utilities the legal right, which they didn't have before, to develop this new source. But it set the ground for pilot programs. That needs to be greatly expanded, because this source can be very, very useful. Now, how it works, I'm not an engineer, but I'll give you the basics, which are what they do is they develop these networks of piping, particularly in urban areas, or it can be a college campus. That's why the project on Governor's Island was mentioned, where it's a network of piping systems in an urban area. And what they do is they access thermal energy, which is heat energy, and they can get it from the ground. They also take it from waste heat, like a building of air conditioning. As it's cooling the building, the air conditioning, it gives off waste heat. These systems capture that and recycle it, and it becomes power. They recycle it and make it, instead of just letting you out to the air, they recycle it and it becomes part of the energy system. So it's a new way of both cooling and heating building stock. And so you could provide heating and cooling to a whole city or part of a city. And what does that do? Well, first of all, it uses electricity to run the pumps to do this, but it's like a third of the electricity that you would use by electrifying the whole building. And that's great, because guess what? The grid's already overtaxed, and we're going to overtax it more the way we're going. This way, you find it an alternative. So it's an alternative source of energy, that being thermal heat, to heat and cool buildings, that's very efficient. And it's brand new, but it's very reliable. The thing about the energy world, it's fascinating, because there's, necessity being the mother of invention. you read the journals on this stuff, the engineering journals and the energy trade journals, there are great new ideas coming up all the time. And we need to track those and find out the most viable ones and embrace them and put them under the tent of all the above. And this is a really good, strong one. And New York has taken a major step on it. First state to do so, but it's pilot programs. That needs to be expanded now and incorporated into the mainstream of the energy plan and promote it aggressively, because it can help in a lot of ways.
Well, let's see if we have any questions coming in from our audience. But in the meantime, let's see if Isur has anything to add to, what Gary has said in his statements.
No, I think Gary, you said it really well in terms of the need for kind of system level thinking and how to kind of balance all these needs. I mean, one thing that we talked about previously, maybe something to bring back to the forefront here is the kind of the safety, the kind of reliability, and the system cost aspects. So if you don't mind, I'll talk a little bit about that. So this is another study done by this group called Our World in Data. So this is a kind of safety of various electricity generation technologies. You see low carbon technologies actually have a pretty good safety record as well. And people are surprised when they see nuclear, but it is so low because nuclear plants in the 60, 70 years of civilian nuclear energy, we only had 3 notable accidents. And even in all 3 of those, only one of them had any fatalities attached to it. That's Chernobyl. So it's an amazing track record of safety. The other thing is the reliability. This is some research that we did last year, looking over the last 6 years of electricity use. So we use more electricity in the summer when there's more air conditioning need, less in the shoulder seasons, the fall, and then more in the winter. Some of we have it's due to cooling and heating. But 3/4 of our electricity demand in general is 24/7. It's steady demand over 365 days. As we add more buildings and more electric vehicle charging, that kind of baseload requirement will only increase as a fraction of the total. So what that means is going back to the reliability components, and obviously currently the grid reliability is ensured by gas. Gas is the piece that ramps up and down as solar and wind, when solar and wind kind of ramp up and down. But you can have a system reliability with nuclear. And back to this kind of system cost piece, we talked a lot about the plant level costs, which is what has come down with solar and wind. But then we got to think about the grid level cost. Like we need to get to the system level thinking. So grid level cost is the batteries, the storage, the transmission lines we talked a bit about, and then the kind of social and environmental aspects, which is kind of land use, emissions, climate change, and its security of supply is critical, right? So, and what happens is, this is a kind of a complicated chart, but what that shows is, as you go from kind of higher emissions factor to lower emissions factor along this axis here. And if you have a kind of mixed grid where you can have different technologies, I just put these 3, but it's a technology agnostic kind of grid. The costs do go up, but they don't go up too much. But when you restrict your technology choices to solar, wind, and backup only, at lower levels of decarbonization, your costs become exponentially more higher. So this ranges from 10% to 75% of solar and wind. So what that means is all that is going to be borne by the ratepayers. So we need to have a kind of system level thinking, just what Gary mentioned earlier, and think about not just what's happening at the plant level, but more on the system level. So that's what we think is needed with our climate plans, so that we can have a kind of reliable kind of backbone. And the other piece of this is that if New York has the kind of abundant, affordable, reliable energy, we can attract and retain industry and create a clean energy revolution supporting groups like Micron, and that generate middle class jobs, not just in the energy sector, but across the economy. And so New York has the kind of technological know-how. We've led the world in many things through the history. We have the skills, as mentioned in this group, and we have the kind of innovation, we have the financial capital of the world. Why are we sleeping on this? Let's get and solve this with all the options we have, as opposed to kind of be very narrow-minded.
Thank you, Isuru. Thank you, everyone, all of our panelists. This concludes our interview. We have one more.